Just don't know. I think that's part of the problem with Trump and his style of politics. There's a lot of bombast, there's a lot of rhetoric, there's a lot of riffing around particular ideas. And of course, this does speak to some of the more hardline elements in Mr. Netanyahu's coalition. It speaks to some of his own hardline Christian Zionist constituents in the United States, but it completely disregards the wishes of Palestinians. It completely disregards the wishes of Egypt, of Jordan, of neighboring Arab states. And it does not have any of the sort of the political or the legal foundations that would allow this to actually happen. So it's really difficult to ascertain whether this is just a bit of bombastic rhetoric, a performative display from Trump that we've seen so often, or if this is actually a marked shift in US policy.
Yes, and can you just tell us, give us a sense of the weight that the big Arab countries carry here, with the likes of Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, UAE, strong allies of the US in rejecting the move to transfer Palestinians?
Yeah, so very, very quickly there was a joint statement from the Saudis, from the Egyptians, from the Jordanians, from the Emiratis, from the Qataris that said we reject this. This is not the way forward. We need a Palestinian state, etc., etc. The sort of thing that you'd expect them to put out, a really firm statement. But what that does is it highlights a lot of the tensions between the Arab states and the United States with regard to the Palestinian question. And while we've seen this process of normalization, particularly with the UAE in recent years and talks of Saudi-Israeli normalization, the Palestinian issue remains unresolved. And that is a real sticking point. It's something that the Saudis will not compromise on moving forwards.
Yes, and can one rule out a takeover of sorts of the Gaza Strip, given how things are so messy in terms of how Gaza is being run, plus the weakening of the Hamas leadership?
I think it would be foolish to rule anything out. I hope it does not happen because this is the home of over 1 million people. This is their ancestral home. This is the place that their families call home. They've got memories of, etc., etc. And now, of course, it is in a state of devastation in light of everything that's happened in the past 15, 16 months. And the comments from other US officials about the extent to which Gaza has been decimated, I thought was quite telling, that it will be a sizable task to make it habitable again. But that does not in any way give the legal, political, or moral right to the United States to go in and claim what is essentially another people's land and then to transform it into the Riviera of the Middle East. That's not in any way condonable. So I am worried because we don't know if this is just performative or if this is actually a serious plan that Trump and the State Department are putting into motion.
So is the situation perhaps in the West Bank, as a matter of comparison, one that is more plausible as far as the US and Israel is concerned, in that Israel virtually controls that occupied territory?
Well, you've used the word occupied, and I think it's the right word to use. It does control it. If you want to access the West Bank, you have to go through Israeli controlled borders. You have to be allowed in by Israeli security. There are checkpoints. There are particular roads that can be used by Palestinians. There are particular roads that cannot be used by Palestinians. And so there is a real sense of control there in operation. And we've seen in recent days and weeks, particularly since the Gaza ceasefire agreement, that the Israeli military presence in the West Bank has increased dramatically. I've spoken to friends across the West Bank who are very, very worried about what is happening, fearful for their lives, fearful for the lives of their friends, their families, and their livelihoods. So it is a very unstable situation. And while the world's eyes are on Gaza and what's happening there, the West Bank remains a particularly tumultuous part of the region.
Yes. Now that Palestinians have returned to Gaza, what might they be thinking about Hamas? Would they apportion the share of blame towards Hamas over the October 7 attack that sparked, the virtual destruction of Gaza?
I've been saying ever since October 7 that the strongest criticism of Hamas that I've ever heard has come from Palestinians. These are many Palestinians, friends of mine, who have been so vocal, so critical of Hamas, not only with regard to October 7, but in terms of Hamas's iron-fisted desire to control all aspects of life in Gaza and to an extent in the West Bank. So, of course, October 7 has opened up all manner of debate and all manner of criticism of Hamas amongst the Palestinian population. There is a lot of anger, but that anger has not just come from October 7. It's not just come from the devastating actions, the terrorist actions of Hamas. It's come from their wider ideological outlook that rejects the plurality and the heterogeneous nature of Palestinian society. So there is a lot of anger there already, and there has been for a long time.
Yeah, so is this, an opportunity then for the Palestinians in Gaza, seeing that Hamas's leadership is as crippled as possible, that another political force come forward? Is that plausible?
It's plausible, but it's unlikely in the sense that there are no real influential political factions operating in Gaza aside from Hamas right now. And that's been one of the problems by virtue of the blockade, by virtue of Israeli policy towards Gaza for the past 20 years or so. We know that Fatah does not exert a great deal of influence in Gaza. We know that the Palestinian Authority exerts very little influence in Gaza, and that's one of the issues moving forward with the ceasefire deal. Who is going to take leadership over what is happening in Gaza? And that's why we're seeing questions about Emirati involvement, Qatari involvement, and I guess now questions about US involvement. And all of this dismisses the agency of Palestinians, denies them the ability to choose their own futures and to articulate their own futures. And it leads to more uncertainty, more instability at a time when there's been so much devastation already.
Okay, and finally, if we are moving forward, then we do hear the Arab states and even here in Australia, the government saying that they are committed to a two-state solution. Is that even realistic to think of such a solution when both Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump are leading their respective countries?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's a question that I don't have a particularly optimistic answer for. There's been a lot of talk of a two-state solution for decades. The Oslo Accords were supposed to set in place a quote-unquote roadmap working towards the two-state solution. And yet, ever since then, we've seen continued attempts by Israeli officials, US officials, Western officials more broadly to create the conditions that allow for the continued reality to be a status quo. We've seen settlement building increasing, and while there have been some criticism of settlements from Western governments, the UK in particular, it hasn't really curtailed that. And until there is an agreement on settlements, until there is a viable way of addressing the territorial dynamics that have been bound up in questions of settlement building, we're not even going to be able to get to a point where we can discuss thorny issues such as Jerusalem, rights of return, movement of people, control of borders, security, all these things that have remained serious sticking points, intransigent sticking points for so many years.
Okay, Professor Simon Mabon, appreciate as always your insights and analysis. Thank you so much.
Thank you.